Well, U.S. President Donald Trump has announced new tariffs, including auto tariffs in the neighborhood of 25%, quote, and similar duties on semiconductors and pharmaceutical drug imports. Last Friday, Trump said levies on automobiles could come as soon as April the 2nd, the day after members of his cabinet are due to deliver reports to him outlining options for a range of import duties. Let's get some perspective on this. Joining me from Washington, D.C. is Gardner, Chief Washington Strategist at Stifel. Brian, thanks a lot for joining us. What is your take on the market's take on these announcements? Seems to be that these tariff announcements will get delayed, walked back, modified, reduced sooner or later. I spoke with a rates and currency specialist earlier this morning, and he noted that fixed income markets and currency markets in particular, barely flinched at this most recent announcement of tariff intentions from the United States. His view is the market is becoming somewhat inured to these type of announcements. What's your view on the nature of the announcements, how they play out, and market reaction?
I agree that is the market's take, and I think the market is justified in taking that view. Let's just go back a couple of weeks when the Trump administration announced the new tariffs on Mexico and Canada, and there were some quick negotiations with Prime Minister Trudeau and President Sheinbaum of Mexico. Some minor concessions, nothing you would consider a game changer, and the U.S. delayed them, those tariffs for a month. We're coming up on that deadline in a couple of weeks. So I think the market is looking at these events and saying, well, okay, we've seen this play before. We know how it ends, and so we're not going to react every time Trump says something about tariffs. There is risk to that. Because at some point, some of these tariffs are going to take place. And I think there is a complacency settling in among some investors. And so people need to be careful that some of these sectoral tariffs are different from the countrywide tariffs that Trump has announced on China, Mexico, and Canada. And the outcome from those might be different.
How would you assess what we know so far about the response from Canada? Canada has appointed a so-called fentanyl czar, a former law enforcement officer who's now in charge of the fentanyl file, cracking down on fentanyl production in this country and ultimately shipments of fentanyl into the United States. Canada has bulked up its border security with a pledge in the approximate neighborhood of $1 billion Canadian to fortify border security. Leadership candidates for the leadership of the Liberal Party. As you know, the Prime Minister has announced his intention to resign. Those leadership candidates are pledging substantially increased defense spending and aspirations to meet the NATO target. How would you assess Canada's response so far?
Well, anytime you're dealing with Donald Trump and tariffs, the tariffs are a means to an end. As much as he loves tariffs themselves, and he has a bit of a mercantilist view of the world, and so he wants U.S. trade deficits to come down. At the end of the day, I also think he views these as means to an end, as I said. And I think with Canada, he got a response that he's been looking for. One, beefing up defense expenditures, and then cracking down on fentanyl going across both borders. It's a big political issue. It's a big societal issue in the United States. And because the Prime Minister was able to give the president a win on this, a political win, Trump was able to back away for now and declare some kind of victory. On the other border, Mexico, the Mexican president responded with more troops on the border. We're not sure. It's just very vague of what that means, whether they were already there, what their powers are going to be, what their role is going to be. But in terms of Canada, I think it was something where Trump could proclaim victory, as he often does. And so, yeah, tariffs playing into that narrative with Trump that they were a means to an end.
Finally, the dynamic within the White House has received some press attention recently. I believe it was the New York Times that noted Peter Navarro is Trump's chief advisor on tariffs. He is a hawk and a maximalist, I believe, as you have said recently, on tariffs. On the other side, Republican politicians, including key senators, are advising him to walk this plan back. Many of those politicians represent states where, for instance, Canada is a big customer of exported products from their states into Canada. Talk to us about that debate and who you see having the upper hand.
So right now, Navarro I believe he has the upper hand because there are only a few voices within the administration that can push back on him. The U.S. Trade Representative, the nominee, Jamieson Greer, has not been confirmed yet, so he's not in office. And while I view him as a hawk on trade, he may not be the maximalist that Navarro is. I think Greer would prefer to use tariffs more like a scalpel rather than a 2x4 and a baseball bat analogy. And Greer will be there carrying some of the water for U.S. politicians who are concerned about the impact on their constituents, on their voters, on the industries in their area. And I think there is a fear among a lot of Republicans, even though they're generally supportive of the Trump administration, that the pain from tariffs will outweigh whatever benefit the United States gets out of them. So for now, Navarro has the upper hand, but I think the playing field is going to level out a little bit more as time goes on.
Brian, thank you so much for this conversation and your insight. Brian Gardner,